Outside of comic books and their related movies, you'd be hard-pressed to find a genre that creates as many iconic recurring characters as horror. I mean, the genre has given us a disproportionately huge number of franchise-creating, near-household names over the years. To list a few, we've got Pennywise, Cthulhu, Michael Myers, Frankenstein, Frankenstein's Monster, Pamela Voorhees, Pamela Voorhees' Monster, friend of the channel Jigsaw, Slenderman, Leather and Ghost, the Face Brothers, Pin and Pyramid, Sadako, Sadako White, both Freddy serial killer and Freddy serial killed, Dracula, Draculismt, Our Girl Annabelle, and of course, Chucky Our Lad. There's a lot of them, and I'm gonna stop listing more because you'll likely know them already, either from consuming their media, absorbing the general zeitgeist, or from being chased around in a circle by them while doing QuickTime events for 2,500 hours. But there's one out there that has passed me, and I'll assume a lot of you, by. A quiet force of 2010's indie horror which was sadly overshadowed by the other breakout stars of the time, despite having a notable influence on modern indie horror games. So, what the hell is Slendrina? I initially came up with this video idea while talking about Steam's Sad Satan game in my last video because the developer of that was called DVLoper. I knew, but failed to mention, that this is a clear reference to the game developer DVLoper, or DVLoper, who is most well known for creating a rather famous series of games that I won't be discussing today, but who is also well known for creating Slendrina. And the entire reason I wanted to make a video about this is because I thought the concept of Slendrina was very funny. I just assumed it was like a female Slenderman OC, and that tickled me. There was a brief, but excruciatingly memorable stretch of time in the early 2010s when people kept making like cute and/or feminine versions of gross and off-putting creepypasta characters, and I thought Slendrina was a sort of Jane the Killer situation, where, you know, someone saw Jeff the Killer, the fucked up eyelidless freak child, and thought, you know what he needs? A goth girl. And trust me, Jeff, that is not a road you take if you're seeking recovery. But no, that's not what this is at all. Slendrina does not mess about, because she is no trend. She is the focus of 10 entire games. And from what I can tell, 10 games with the same chronological madness you'll find in the Saw movies? So in many ways, she's no Jane the Killer. She's a regular John the Kramer. But enough background on why this video exists, let's just get into it. Starting with the first of 10 games, Slendrina, from 2013. The icon for this game is utterly harrowing. Invert the colors, slap on some noise, and play a distorted Caretaker song, and you've got a hit 2021 analog horror villain. But to be fair, that process could apply to most images. Now, before we start talking about the game itself, keep in mind that this is a 3D mobile horror game from 2013, which is to say, don't get your hopes up in terms of graphical fidelity or mechanical complexity. It was a simpler time. This is back when most mobile games were more or less Newgrounds Flash games that you could carry around in your pocket, and not the video game equivalent of a horrible sweatshop casino fusion for people predisposed to addiction. In fact, modern games are much worse than that because at least in a real casino, your gambling can actually yield money, and real casinos generally don't target children. But anyway. Spooky menu! Ooh! Help! After being flashbanged by the reddest screen scientifically possible, we get our instructions. Pick up 6 items and get through the exit to win. Don't look at Slendrina! So you may be able to tell that this is something of a Slender clone, but with 6 items to find instead of the regulation 8. But don't leave just yet, let's give it a chance. We're given the choice of 4 different maps: the warehouse, the hotel, the yard, and the swamp. Naturally, we take a look at her warehouse. Turns out the items, nay, objects, we have to find are keys, such as this one I find atop the Slendrina forklift. And as those of the Slend genus are wont to do, Slendrina will appear and make us go eep with a loud noise, and if we look at her for too long, we are defeated. And then shown an ad for a slop game that tells us to build a super strong babe. No, I do not think I will do that, thank you. There's a big thing in horror gaming and general gaming culture at large, where it's like uncool or embarrassing to react to jump scares or loud noises. Granted, I think that's largely a response to the fake or exaggerated reactions that some people have, but I think if you don't react in any way to unexpected loud noises and flashing imagery, you should legally be considered a traffic hazard. Yeah, this is me admitting I had some little jumps while playing Slendrina in 2024. Not that any of the scares here are particularly artful or intentionally paced, but I will say that the frequency of Slendrina appearing felt so much harder to predict than I expected, and it was also substantially more reserved than a lot of other similar games I've played in the past. And I'll be frank, I did approach this game fully expecting a cheap jump scare fest, and that's not at all what I got. It was a simple collect X of Y game with an okay atmosphere, some mild jump scares, and it didn't overstay its welcome. Hell, even when you collect all of the items, the game is like, well, guess it's time to go, followed by a nice congrats screen. It's even polite and tasteful in its on-screen text. Unfortunately, this is then ruined by a My Talking Tom 2 ad. Oh, what is this? A horrifying, uncanny beast. Is this what the kids are into these days? Yeah, I'm playing these games on the BlueStacks Android emulator for PC, so I'm getting the same ads you would get if you were on an actual mobile device. It's extra immersive. Play with Talking Tom!
In what sense?
And the other maps for this game are more or less the same formula. They switch up the items you look for. In the hotel you find fuses for a broken lift. In the swamp you find car parts to fix your car. The weak link would have to be the yard, where you find a random selection of items to help you open a very climbable gate, and finding those items is about as tedious as Slender's 8 pages, because you're in a much more open space compared to the concise and easy to navigate interiors of the hotel and the warehouse. But even then, I'd still take these Slendrina maps over Slender any day of the week. I did not expect to be saying that in this video. The swamp suffers from the same open feel as the yard, but it's the Slendrina swamp, and that's funny to me, so it gets a pass. It's hard to put into words why, but this game felt so much better to me than I expected it to. Because by no means is it a great game, and I don't necessarily feel the need to play it ever again, but I can fully imagine loving this as a child. And it lacks the glaring issues that a lot of other child-friendly horror games have. It feels cozy while maintaining a friendly, spooky atmosphere. Kinda like that old campfire story about the clown statue, or the angel statue, depends who you heard it from, but yeah, that's what Slendrina 2013 feels like. Not everything has to be a Baraska, Pancake Family, or Pen Pal to qualify as good. You can be kinda silly and comfortably spooky at the same time, and that's a nice feeling too. But anyway, we've got 9 more games to look at. Good heavens. The icon for Slendrina the Cellar is what I can only describe as a YouTube thumbnail face.
Unfortunately for my political opponents, I have already depicted myself as the Slender Chad and them as Soydrina.
Upon launching this, it may initially appear that this is a very similar game to the first one. And it is, but let's take a closer look, because again, this is from a very early time in indie horror games. We're talking about the post-amnesia, pre-PT era here. People were trying weird shit and evolving in all kinds of different ways. Plus, again, you gotta cut it some slack for being a mobile game. Not only were the presentation standards much lower back then, but both the hardware and software required were less accessible too. The 2010s, and particularly the early 2010s, were a time of rapid change, even if it didn't necessarily feel like it. You might not feel like you're part of history, but you are, and resisting that fact only makes your entry in the encyclopedia all the more tragic. Anyway, if there was ever a competition as to who is better, Slenderman or Slendrina, Slenderman has you collecting his pages, but Slendrina has you collecting whole-ass books. Yeah, welcome to big school, dickhead. One thing you may notice is that the game is substantially more cramped and claustrophobic than the first. And yeah, sure, we're used to that as a horror standard today, but look at the other Slender clones of the time that did not realize that a much more compact or oppressive environment lends itself to much less tedium and much easier atmosphere building. And this isn't just a reskinned find X of Y situation in a slightly different setting, at least not if you look close enough. We can see here that the developer has added things like interactable elements in doors and containers, and location-based scares and trigger points, even if they are a little silly. But kudos to DVLoper, you put a limit on scare triggers. That's something that ZKLoper did not do with Sad Satan, and famously, Bloober Team, a pretty large company, did not do with Layers of Fear.
I think we're gonna die again.
And we even get some cool animations, like when you win and Slendrina gets sucked into a wall. In fact, this happens on all 3 maps of this game. Crikey. I claim no responsibility if somebody draws a super graphic image of Slendrina being Philadelphia experimented into a wall, but regardless of how scary phasing into a wall may be, it may never compare to this awful Talking Tom analog horror ad I got after winning. This genuinely happened to me while I was recording, and it freaked me out.
I've played this game.
What the fuck?
The other maps for the game are much the same, but with some having slightly more complex animations and interactions than the others. Nothing that would impress anyone today, but again, for their time, these are pretty cool, especially for a single developer. Unfortunately, when this game came out, I was both slightly too old to be the target audience and slightly too young to appreciate that fact. I was very much in the phase of my life where anything that wasn't deeply impressive or cool was cringe and bad. And I'll talk more about this at the end of the video, but just know that back then, I would have been wrong about this game series. Holy shit, look at this thing. That was tremendous. Also, on a technical note, you might have noticed that the frame rate in this game is substantially better than the first two, so all in all, this is strictly improved from the first, in basically every way. That makes this very much the Terminator 2 of the Slendrina games. Put that quote on your store page. But anyway, we're 2 games in now, and we've got some theory work to do. Let's compile all the lore we've absorbed as of now. Slendrina's scary woman, don't look at her, collect her books, she doesn't like that, oh dear, there's a thing, ah. But before we move on to the next game, check out this horrible image. I don't know why, this is a very unsettling image to me. In a game full of relatively silly scares, this one is just horrid and I can't quite figure out why. Here, let me translate it into a horror image that's fit for the 2020s. Slendrina has a mother and a baby. Let's back up. Let's first appreciate this wild fact. It took 3 entire games and 7 prior locations for DVLoper to use a mental institution as a setting for one of these games. That is another incredible show of restraint for 2010's horror. Our goal in this game is, much like the others, collect things while not staring at Slendrina. Sounds easy enough, I've been doing that my whole life, but there's a twist here. We also have to avoid a very angry woman that chases us. And we all know the saying, hell hath no fury like a very angry woman that chases us. And the fact that we can look at Slendrina's mother and not die in the process makes me think that Slendrina got her cognito-hazard qualities from her father's side. Add that to the lore list. We also now have a health bar, so no more Call of Duty style regeneration in our Slendrina games. Not when Mother is around. And this complicates matters because before, Slendrina herself was something of an inconvenience. But now she's a bit of a bigger inconvenience. She'll chip away at your health over and over again, meanwhile her mother will batter the fuck out of you and take away huge chunks at a time. The baby, on the other hand, doesn't do much, but it's here and that's half the battle. We are given a way to heal, thankfully, and it's exactly how you'd imagine. Magic potions. Seeing as we're in a medical institution, I'll assume that these magic potions are, like, morphine? Remember, potions and elixirs, while sounding like fantasy items, are real things. Take a swig of Calpol when you've got a cold and tell me that magic isn't real. Or, alternatively, take a medicine made for adults and you'll feel very similar. But ultimately, there's not too much to say here, other than some of the ambient music is very reminiscent of Stalker. I bet you didn't expect that comparison to pop up. And when you get to the end, you get a legendary theend.jpg. Whew, that was a creepy place. And the baby, who was it? What was it? Well, I managed to find what I was looking for anyway. Ah, lovely weather. No notes. Absolute perfection. Anyway, check out this hilariously inaccurate trailer for a slop game called Doomsday: Last Survivors. They make it look like a Resident Evil type deal, while 2 distinct soundtracks play at the same time. Good heavens, this is what the game actually looks like. Let's move on. I'm starting to think that Slendrina's main sin is owning a lot of empty buildings. She may dress like a Victorian waif, but in property value alone, she's easily in the top 1%. Anyway, I need to figure out the mystery of Slendrina, who she really is. Yeah man, me too. This is the first of the Slendrina games to not have a simple collect X of Y and run to the end objective. This time it's collect X of Y and then run to a medicine cabinet and then run to the end. This is innovation. The game also gives you a pretty detailed map, which is nice because this is far and away the most intricate setting we've had so far. As much as I'd like the others for what they were very much either open spaces or long corridors with rooms. Slendrina's house, on the other hand, is very much a house, with furniture and such. Now that's innovation. The health bar system has been discarded in this one, which makes sense as there's no angry lady chasing you around to batter you senseless. She's clearly having a bad day and wants no part of this. A really bad day. So we're now very much back to basics, which is no bad thing, and you know, there's not much more to say about this game. We're at game 4 out of 10 and not all of them will be as noteworthy as the others, so this is a very serviceable Slendrina game with a few fun new additions and a slightly more impressive map. That's basically it. Let's move on. Never mind. Holy shit. Bombshell. In the cellar area, yeah, there's another cellar, we find a chest with 3 skulls in it, and a photograph of the Slendrina family, which shows Slendrina, Slendrina's mother, and take a guess at who her father is. Is it A, creepypasta villain Jeff the Killer, B, cryptid hero Mothman, C, ominously foreshadowing Walton Goggins, or D, definitely Slenderman? I hate to break it to you Walton fans, but you're not getting Goggins today. It's Slenderman. Pretty slendering, of course, so potentially just H.P. Lovecraft. This does confirm that Slenderman not only canonically breeds, but also takes family photos. So definitely not H.P. Lovecraft, come to think of it. And then we get to see them all in their current state. When your circle's small, but you crazy. The ending claims that we solved the mystery of Slendrina, but ultimately I think I have more questions than before. But anyway, now for something completely different. Recently I played a game that was a really interesting new approach to a long-running horror series. It moved away from the methodical, jump-scare-heavy first-person gameplay to a more retro-styled 2D adventure game that features you saving captives from a disturbing supernatural creature which you must personally avoid while also overcoming various secondary villains in their own bespoke ways. I also played Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit, and that was pretty cool too, but Slendrina 2D was here first. Okay, I'll be honest, the main menu isn't giving me much help with trying to hype this up, but thankfully, there's some lore to help me with that. Hello, my name is Alexander. I just have to tell you about what happened to me one evening when I was out for a walk. Suddenly, the rain began to fall from the sky and I started running to find a shelter. In front of me appeared an old abandoned house that I had never seen before and I decided to take a closer look. Opening any kind of text with hello exclamation mark is BIS. I think I open every single message and email in this exact format, so we've already got a relatable hero. And this, as the name suggests, is a 2D Slendrina game. It's a classic scrolling adventure game with hidden items and whatnot, which is an absolute staple of 2000s and early 2010s Flash games, so immediately I'm feeling nostalgic. And the visuals go a really long way in aiding that. The mix of low-resolution photography and handmade MS Paint style textures just really tickles me. But unlike a lot of similar games, this isn't a bloody pixel hunt walkthrough required adventure game. It's fairly straightforward, and intuitive, if you ignore some light moon logic. But we're playing a Slendrina game, we're way past moon logic at this stage. And despite the pretty big format change, the same Slendrina rules apply as before. You've got to find keys and not look at her, or you die. Or just kind of respawn in another room. You can also be damaged by environmental effects, such as flying ghoul, or swinging axe, or jumping spike, or normal cat. She may have gone a bit overboard with the axes, to be quite frank. And much like her other properties, this house in the woods is enormous. Below an entire house, there's a cellar, and a dungeon, with a balcony. And property fears aside, this game did terrify me for one very good reason. It included the scariest enemy type you can encounter in really any media. A fucking skeleton. I'm so glad they're not real. But as a first for the series, we get melee combat. DVLoper simply cannot stop evolving this series, and good heavens am I thankful for that. We get to go and brawl with Slendrina's mother, and unfortunately, she beats the fuck out of me, as is tradition, but eventually I succeed. And interestingly, there's no health bar in this game, so the connection between health bars and Slendrina's mother is completely severed. It's something else entirely that's causing one. Unfortunately, there's only one combat encounter in this game, but think of it like a tech demo. If Half-Life 2 is allowed to be called one of the best games of all time while being basically a collection of tech demos, so can Slendrina 2D. We eventually come across an imprisoned woman. We speak to her, we steal her lighter, and then we blow the fuck out of Slendrina's cave mansion with a barrel of her own gunpowder, and we walk off into safety. The end. But uh-oh, Thatcher's back! Unfortunately, this is followed by me getting a horrible ad straight afterwards, which has this annoying SpongeBob AI voice telling me I should steal my parents' credit cards or whatever. But I'm glad I thugged out the whole ad, because at the end you can clearly hear this SpongeBob AI being dragged away from the microphone like a racist stand-up comedian who's had too many.
Famous celebrities and cartoon characters. Try it out now. Download free.
Truly though, Slendrina 2D is great. It's simple while also introducing new elements to the series. It draws inspiration from other games while shedding their bad parts, and overall it's just utterly charming in most ways. But alas, there are no more 2D entries to be had. But that's not to say there's no more evolution. Remember Slendrina's baby in the asylum? It's all grown up now. And now it's a larger baby. We're back to our classic Slendrina formula here. 3D item hunt while trying not to get goosed. This time, we're looking for 8 key pieces to open a safe, and also, we must run from the baby! 2 exclamation marks, holy shit. From the start, we can see that the item hunting is at its most complex so far, taking some cues from Slendrina 2D with the environmental interactions, but largely it's the same formula we're used to. Avoid looking at Slendrina, find things in a creepy locale, but the titular Child of Slendrina is frankly horrific. If you look at its model, it appears to be some kind of horrible arachnid-like torso with the baby's spike-mouthed head planted on top, and he chases you around, panting and such. And then it kills you. Ah, so it's the baby that brings the health bar. Got it. We get some genuinely great directional audio, which helps you evade the baby. It's not great at accounting for walls and doors and such, but come on, it's a mobile game with directional audio that works. Although it's quite unpleasant because the baby sounds like he's smoked 8 packs a day for 30 years. But if you pay attention to the directional audio, you can play the entire game without even seeing him, which is quite a nice way to live. One of my favorite things about this game is that if you want, you can just leave the cellar that you started in and go into the 5th Slendrina family home. It's actually quite cozy, frightening newborn images aside, and they even have a widescreen TV. I wonder what they watch. Oh. But despite being able to escape the cellar, you cannot just run away from the house, because you are on a mission to unlock the dreaded secret safe, which they put you in a cell with at the beginning, which was an odd choice. But disregard that, here's Slender Man as an actual foe. He gives you weird jazz hands and orchestral stings. It's fascinating seeing him here because he's the only enemy that actually appears in the house area, and he seems as surprised to see you as you are to see him. He wasn't even mentioned in the help text in the main menu. It really makes you feel like you've broken into this poor man's home. It's also funny to imagine Slendrina and the baby growing increasingly worried that you've escaped while their father and grandfather respectively freaks out that somebody is going through their cupboards. But anyway, after getting all the key pieces and stealing Slendrina's diary from the big secret safe, the house begins to collapse. But this isn't too much of a big deal, because I think this is their 3rd or 4th holiday home. Then we get to read some of Slendrina's diary. Dear Diary, it has been a good day today, but I'm starting to feel dizzy and nauseous now. The whole family went to the park and the weather was wonderful. Mother was in an extra good mood, which doesn't happen that often. When we came home, she cooked us dinner. I thought it tasted a bit weird, but didn't dare to say anything. Father looked pale and had to lie down straight after dinner. I can hear him in the other room. The pain. I'm feeling even worse now. My head is spinning. And I believe, cautiously, that this is implying that both Slender Man and Slendrina were created when Slendrina's mother poisoned them both. Add that to the lore list, alongside the destructive powers of stealing Slendrina's books. And naturally, the impeccable Slendrina vibe is once more interrupted by a horrific text-to-speech slop game. God damn it. Wow. This is the most succinct and also ominous help screen we've seen so far. I decide to get silly and try this one on extreme difficulty, and I immediately regret it because this is yet another health bar Slendrina game, which are notably harder than the regeneration ones. And there's no Slendrina mother or baby in this game, so my health bar formula is completely fucked. We have to collect fuses to power a thing to unlock a door to win. It's nothing especially new, but you know what is? This teddy bear. My brother had one just like this growing up. Slendrina is my brother, add that to the lore. And in other lore news, Slendrina has had a substantial buff. Before, when you looked at her, you could pretty easily just look away with very little resistance, and now she drags you back with the strength of a dying star. Such is the extreme life. Here's a little peek behind the curtain for you. I was watching the World of Warcraft The War Within Season 1 Narubar Palace Mythic Race to World First event, holy shit that's a mouthful, while recording the gameplay for Slendrina the School. So in the background of this footage is some extremely impassioned casting, which, if anything, just made the game more tense.
We're going to be able to plan healing cooldowns to try to live through this for as long as possible on the next pull.
No combat reses left available means that you have to be really precise with your positioning in this second phase. The volatile concoction coming out in 2 seconds time, the eggs alongside it.
Swirls landing.
There will be some space in the middle, so we're going to gate back to the middle. It's so smart. That's far. 5 seconds before we'll see on the next scuttling.
Anyway, after being defeated and starting the game again on medium difficulty, we plow on. Ultimately, this is a very straightforward entry to the Slendrina franchise, but that's not to say it's not noteworthy. It's a really solid evolution of the original formula, and while it may not add as much as the others in the series, atmospherically, it's great. It also has some really cool lore. Like, Slendrina drew some pictures once, and was probably a child, which is a little concerning, let's not think too much on that. After finding all of the fuses, opening the door, and returning Slendrina's teddy bear to her school desk, she pushes us down some stairs. But then, lets us go. This is the first sign of benevolence, or at the very least, a lack of malevolence, that we've seen from her. I don't know if that's a particularly big turn in the series, but it's something to note. And now we've only got 3 games left to look at, with the next one being what I unfortunately consider to be the weak link of the series. Ask yourself this: why is this game called Slendrina the Cellar 2? Is it because this game, Slendrina 8, is a direct sequel to Slendrina 2, aka Slendrina the Cellar? Nope, it's because Slendrina is in a cellar again. I suppose I'm too much of a layman to decipher why the other subterranean locations she's been in did not qualify as cellars, but that's likely because I don't own as many properties as her. Slendrina is calling me poor. Anyway, we know the drill by now. Collect items, don't look at Slendrina. However, both her mother and child are here now, and they operate as usual as well. Unfortunately, in this game we return to something of a maze location, and this one is enormous. I felt that prior games did a really good job of moving away from that for the most part, but this one gets a little tedious. That's not to say there's nothing good at play here though. We get a way to effectively hide from some of the enemies by turning off our flashlight in time. Oh, we also have a flashlight for the first time, discounting Slendrina 2D, which is yet another remarkable show of restraint from DVLoper. Every other indie horror game ever is basically gagging to throw a flashlight your way. Annoyingly, when you do get caught, you get chased for fucking ages, like a really long time. Especially from the child. The mother seems to give up a little easier, but this wee freak does not quit. And what's especially annoying is that the really great directional audio from Child of Slendrina is gone entirely. I don't think the enemies make any noise or have any indication of their presence unless you can directly see them. And even the game's end is weak. We get locked in the cellar. Oh dear, no cool lore or funny writing. Boo. This was a bad showing from Slendrina. But, I mean, even at its lowest, this is still, at worst, standard indie horror from the 2010s. I've played 1,000 games just like this one on itch.io that came out in the 2020s, and honestly, from the way people talk about Slendrina, I was expecting every game to be this or worse. But in any case, we've got 2 games left. And let me spoil you with this. They are both hard hitters. It'll be hard to call this series finished until we have a dedicated Slendrina the Swamp game, but I suppose the forest is a step in the right direction for that. Now, if you recall, in the first Slendrina game, I said that it was at its weakest in these more open environments, but DVLoper, as is tradition at this point, seemed to recognize that problem and fix it. But before we get to that, let's look at the help screen. Initially, it appears to be a classic formula: find 7 keys in a dark forest and... 7? 7 keys? Has shrinkflation hit the Slendrina games? This cannot be right. There's something wrong with this game, but let's just crack on anyway. Otherwise, it's a very normal avoid Slendrina, avoid her wandering mother, collect the things type deal. Now you may look at this and immediately think, how the hell are you meant to find anything in this game? This is going to be more tedious than Slender the 8 pages, but no, my friend. DVLoper gave us a map, with all points of interest circled for our convenience. The forest is not the game, my friend. It is simply the canvas on which this masterpiece is painted. And if you're worried that the map may trivialize the game, not every location actually has something important. Some are red herrings, you're truly kept on your toes, which is only aided by this genuinely atmospheric, stalker-like ambience that's going on. I know I mentioned Stalker earlier with Slendrina the Asylum, but this is genuinely pretty uncanny. It might sound like I'm giving it too much credit, but keep in mind, mobile game. Free mobile game about Slendrina. Come on, we weren't expecting this. While I was writing that note, Slendrina's mother came out of the woods and started chasing me, and let me tell you, while she's really not that much of a threat here, seeing her lumber around on the cusp of this relatively very short view distance is weirdly creepy. And also kind of funny. It can be both. You can also sometimes catch Slendrina doing that, and she just twitches ominously while being slightly too far away to hurt you. And again, this animation would do absolute numbers in an analog horror series, but people will laugh at it here. Make it make sense. She also fucking bamboozled me here. Check out this elite scare. She's twitching in the distance, she disappears, and then BAM! Mild health damage. I'd probably say that this game marked the start of something very big for DVLoper. This is the first time since Slendrina 2D that we get puzzles and item interactions that go beyond a simple collect X of Y formula. Sure, things like Slendrina the School had moments of this with the teddy bear and whatnot, but this game really dives headfirst into it. For example, you've got to find gas to power a generator that turns on a record player that tells you a code that unlocks a box, and so on. Like full strings of puzzles which the other games didn't really have. It's a really nice evolution, or I should really say, another really nice evolution in the series, because there have been quite a few so far. However, I'm still troubled by the 7 keys thing. There's something really wrong here, and I just can't put my finger on it. While walking around a little house that I found, I noticed that the game has reintroduced directional audio for Slendrina's mother, which was sorely missing in the previous game. So that was lovely to see, but, this is when I found out what was wrong with the game. That strange feeling I had? Well,
We are here encountering the vampire. Nosferatu.
holy shit. Count Orlok is living in a cabin in the Slendrina forest. Why? That's why there's only 7 keys to find and not 8. Orlok has been up to his tricks again. So we collect all 7 keys and we go to unlock the Slendrina coffin, and good heavens, have I got some lore for you. Inside the coffin is Orlok / Nosferatu, and he is Slendrina's husband, the father of the Child of Slendrina. What do their family gatherings look like? What a fucking bombshell. Unfortunately, that is then interrupted by a horrible, awful, no-good slop zombie game ad that just ruins everything. Listen to these fucking sound effects. Why does that ambulance turn into a building? I hate these games. The ad doesn't even have the right name. Nosferatu, I apologize, you were never meant to see this. But let's move on to the next and final of the main series Slendrina games. Well, holy hell, if this main menu is anything to go by, we'll be dealing with not only Slendrina, but Count Orlok, and maybe even a giant spider. Sorry, I didn't mean Count Orlok, I meant Slendrina's husband. And I didn't mean giant spider, I meant his 2 pets. We wake up, locked in some kind of cell after presumably being knocked out. And to escape the cell, we have to break the door open with a brick. This game is not fucking around. Shortly after, Slendrina walks down some stairs and kills me. Again, not fucking around. After I try again and get to actually explore a little bit, I can safely say that this is the best that the series has looked so far in terms of visuals and setting. I'm getting reminded of another game, Nosferatu: The Wrath of Malachi. I don't know why though. Oh, also, don't ignore the fact that this game takes place in a castle. Slendrina has graduated from multi-property landlord to genuine feudal land baroness. And this game has a more nebulous objective than the previous ones, just being to escape. There's still keys and items to work with, but no collect X of Y, which, to be honest, is a bit refreshing. As much praise as I've had for the series so far, there are only so many Slender type games you can play before your brain physically starts to wither. Good heavens. That is a big spider, and good heavens is he angry. The chase beasts in this game, of which there are 3, are stubborn bastards. They do not give up, which is a bit tricky to navigate as there are quite a few dead ends in this literal castle, and they move about as fast as you. I just wish there was a way to... holy shit. Oh my god, you can get a sword. Oh my god, you can get a sword and you can kill villains with it. This is the best game ever made. They added melee combat to my 3D Slendrina castle game. This genuinely is Nosferatu, the Wrath of Malachi. When you kill the enemies, they do respawn, but they respawn in set areas, like I think Orlok spawns back by his coffin and the spiders behind bookcases. But being able to get rid of them even for a little bit of time is a real lifesaver. This doesn't trivialize the game though, because you've got to get the timings right on your swings or you'll end up trading blows, and you really don't want that, because that's when Slendrina herself becomes an enormous issue. Most of the enemies take a few hits to kill you, and you can outdamage them for the most part, but if Slendrina pops up with some chip damage, she'll kill your whole run. She's gone from being largely an inconvenience in her own series to being the most pressing threat at any given time. You can find Slendrina's mother chained up at one point, and I was gonna make some kind of comment about this, but honestly, I was too stressed at the time. The game really makes you feel like you're in a hurry, because there are 4 roaming threats at all times, and you've got a lot of rooms to search. I also didn't make a comment about Slendrina's mother because she immediately broke out of her cell, and I don't know where she is. Maybe there are 5 threats now, I don't know. Is she one of Slendrina's husband's pets? If so, let's not read too much into that. And I'm not being facetious when I talk about being stressed. This is a genuinely tense experience, and I'm sure it was the basis for DVLoper's later works. And while I've judged the other games favorably due to their hardware constraints and the time in which they were made, I can safely say that this one just kind of rules regardless. Quite often I stream myself playing random itch.io horror games on Twitch, and this outclasses almost all of the games I've played there. Granted, the bar isn't high, but it's there. And this is a mobile game called Slendrina X. We didn't expect this to be good. Anyway, after doing a few item puzzles and some frantic searching, as well as one puzzle which was, I don't fully understand what's happening here, we reach the end. But this is no ordinary Slendrina game. This has a fucking boss fight in it, and I carry no irony or sarcasm when I say this. It is poetic. If you ignore the white void and floating faces that comprise its location. In order to defeat Slendrina, you must trap her in a book. But how? You've spent 9 games in a row trying to avoid her. 9 games in a row spent fleeing from her because you were powerless. 9 games in a row where her very visage could kill. But not anymore. You beat her by staring her down, and trapping her in just one of the dozens of books and pages and miscellaneous objects we've collected over the last 10 games. And with that, we come to the end of the Slendrina series. Well, after the rest of the family gets mad and chases us out anyway. And there we have it. The end. Now, there's a lot to say about this series, and I'm not entirely sure of where to start, but if I had to quickly summarize, I would say that I approached Slendrina with the intention of finding something to laugh at, but I left the series with a fundamentally changed view on content creation, content creators, and the internet as a whole. Bear with me, I'm going to rant for a while. I was so ready to mock this game series. I was so ready to bash out a quick and easy video on this, instead of one that took its time to look through all of these games without prejudice. But while playing the first game, the very first in the series, I found myself realizing something. I'm not that guy. I'm way too old to be that guy, and if my demographics are anything to go by, so are pretty much all of you. What is there to make fun of here? What, that it's derivative of a more established series or concept? Find me something that isn't, particularly in horror where almost all popular games are either based on, or themselves create, enormous trends. Any you can name are extremely rare exceptions. Sure, the Slendrina Slenderman connection is pretty on the nose, but the games don't shy away from that. They don't act like there's something they aren't. In fact, if anything, they should be praised for how self-aware they are. People may also make fun of the fact that the games aren't particularly deep or intellectual in any kind of way, and yeah, they're pretty surface level. But is that a bad thing? If you think it is, then apologies that it doesn't require hordes of video essays and analyses to be appreciated. How dare it be accessible without a semester's worth of required reading and other people's praise for it to hold up? Look back to the list of characters I rattled off in the intro to this video. Sure, some of those are more deep characters like your Jigsaws, your Pyramid Heads, and your Frankensteins, but other ones there like Freddy Krueger, Chucky, and Slender Man? Do you think they appeal to audiences because of their analytical depth? But perhaps the biggest reason people might mock the Slendrina series is because it's quite child-friendly. It's the same thing you hear about stuff like Five Nights at Freddy's and so on. But I have a question here. What's wrong with being child-friendly? I recently put up a poll on my YouTube community page asking people when they got into horror media. As expected for my demographics and the general demographics of horror YouTube, the majority of people got into horror in the 2010s, but there were people on either side of that window. So for people before the 2010s, would you dismiss things like Goosebumps? Are You Afraid of the Dark? Scooby-Doo? Courage the Cowardly Dog? The Trapdoor? Coraline? Monster House? Doctor Who? Point-and-click horror games on Newgrounds and Miniclip? I would certainly hope not, because yeah, these things can be silly and they're far from the intensity of horror in more adult media, and you can laugh at them for that, as I have in this video towards Slendrina. But to be actively critical or dismissive towards these things is just misguided and ignorant, or in the case of many content creators, straight up malicious. But I'll talk about that later. And for newer horror fans, if you don't see that many, but not all, popular analog horror series have an age-agnostic appeal, and therefore a very large young audience, then those jokes I made earlier about turning Slendrina into an analog horror villain were aimed specifically at you. Sorry. To be able to create effective and accessible horror media that is fit for children without crossing any lines or being exploitative is a real talent, and that's never a quality we should mock media for. But this isn't where my praise for Slendrina ends in this regard, because look at the progression from the first game to the last. Game by game, DVLoper added in new mechanics, new types of scares, new enemy varieties, new uses of space and sound. Gradually, it became more and more complex until it eventually was what I consider to be more intricate than most other indie horror experiences on the market today. And it was a well-implemented, well-paced, and still child-friendly progression, with no barrier to entry whatsoever. To the point where I would say that playing all 10 games in order is one of, if not the best tutorials for modern horror gaming that you could hope for. And I'm being entirely serious. The next natural step would be something like Penumbra Overture. It would be a nearly seamless transition, and to be honest, Overture really only adds physics interactions and menu navigation into the mix, which not all games have. And again, I know I keep bringing it up, but it is important. All of these games were made for mobile. That is astounding to me. And another great thing to see here is how DVLoper himself progressed as well. You can see where he tried things out, you can see where he experimented, you can see where he found things that didn't quite work, and he did all of this while maintaining a consistent brand and tone. So with all of that said, why don't people treat this series or any similar ones with respect? Because it's hard. Not the games, they're all pretty straightforward, but talking about the games. Earnestly. We've bred such a cynical atmosphere around gaming, and especially anything that could be deemed as entry-level or for a younger audience. And what this is translated to is that every game, or specifically in this case, every horror game, must be a Silent Hill 2, or a Darkwood, or a Fear and Hunger, and that's just not true. Things that are more accessible, things that are simpler, less edgy, less quote-unquote artistic, less serious, or even just less scary, are all still valid, and they deserve to be spoken about as such. But it's so easy to be cynical. It's so easy to be elitist or dismissive or appeal to the insecure and the snobby. You can generate such cheap authority by setting an imaginary bar and mocking everything beneath it. And it's so common to see this. It's everywhere and it's exhausting. Especially online, where the cultural taste is decided by 20-somethings with microphones and access to editing software, and I say this as one of them. We are no authority. We're all too old for this weird, high school level gatekeeping and way too young and inexperienced to have the confidence that we speak with. That's not to say that our opinions don't matter, it's just to say that they're not infallible. So if there's anything to be cynical towards, it's us, not the silly and fun games like Slendrina. Be cynical of the people who mock and critique. Because, let's be frank, having your opinions set by YouTubers is not a good look, especially given how catastrophic our track record is as people. I would not be surprised to hear if content creators have the highest serious controversy per capita of any group. When put under a microscope, most of what we say is fine, but when it's not, we need to be called out on it. You need to recognize when you're having your opinions pandered to for the sake of views and engagement. You need to recognize when you are having opinions made for you, and yes, that includes right now. I'm not above anyone else. I've certainly done exactly what I'm criticizing people for, and who knows, I may fall into that trap again. Be wary. Just think of us as entertainers, and that's it. If we occasionally bring up a good point or introduce you to new ideas, that's great, but take everything we say with a pinch of salt. When I started playing Slendrina, expecting to find a game that I could mock and churn out a video for, I ended up being met with a game series that was entirely charming, entirely full of authenticity, and entirely full of heart. And I can't ignore that, even if it would be easier to do so. But you know, maybe it wasn't Slendrina itself that made me think this way, but the fucking ads that played after each game. I could have paid for the ad-free versions of these games, and part of me feels bad for not doing so, but I'm glad I didn't. Partially because the ads were very infrequent, they never break up gameplay and it's only after you die or finish the game that they pop up, but mostly because the whiplash I got going from the charming, rustic Slendrina gameplay to these horrific, soulless abominations is outrageous and only served to make me appreciate these games more. I can't even begin to describe these fucking things. They are an unspeakably inhuman creation. We aim our cynicism in entirely the wrong direction. Ebony, the King's Return, looks like the epitome of creativity hell. Whatever AI model generated this was the first to ever shed a tear of shame, but hey, remember what I said earlier, form your own opinions. Maybe you love Ebony the King's Return, and that's okay. Just please tell me why in the comments. But yeah, seeing this soulless trash really made me appreciate the humble Slendrina. Also, one time when I wasn't recording, I got an ad for a divorce lawyer, so that was interesting. And another thing that's interesting is that the random selection of games I got shown by Google's ad services were really not that far removed from a lot of the sponsors we take on as YouTubers. Next time you see somebody mocking Slendrina or FNAF or any other easy target, ask yourself if they would, or at any point did, accept a Raid Shadow Legends sponsorship. If so, then the real easy target was you. Just joking, fellow YouTubers, get that bag, pay that rent. I too am open to sponsorships, just not for you, Raid, or the tank or boat or plane games, or the evil fake therapy service, or I'm gonna stop before I burn any more lucrative bridges. Now, I don't want to end the video on a cynical note, so let's take a look at some of the more fun Slendrina things, like her various wiki pages. On one wiki, her interests/hobbies are listed as hurting people/murdering, which honestly we can't actually prove. Citation is absolutely needed on that one. She only ever sort of crawls on us and makes us collapse, mostly because we're trespassing and trying to trap her in a book. Her dislikes are listed as her victims escaping from her and being trapped in a book. Well, that tracks. On her villains wiki page, we are told that she is the daughter of Slender Man and Slendrina's mom, as well as granddaughter of Granny and Grandpa, which is a little vague, I suppose, but if I had a dad called Slender Man, I don't think I'd bother naming the rest of the family members at all either. And her being on the villains wiki is quite interesting to me because it raises the question, is she really a villain? Yes, absolutely. Here is a non-exhaustive list of the empty properties she owns. A warehouse, a hotel, a yard, a swamp, 4 different independent cellars, a house with a 5th cellar, an asylum, another house with a 6th cellar, and a dungeon/cave. Another house for her dad and son, which has a 7th cellar, a school, which has an 8th cellar, a forest, and a castle, which has a 9th cellar. Of course she's evil. Think of all the Airbnbs and parking lots we could have had instead. And that's about all I have to say about Slendrina for now. But as I alluded to earlier, DVLoper has a history post-Slendrina, and to hear about that, check back again sometime soon. But for now, let me send you off with the frankly wonderful Slendrina theme. A theme fit for a true horror icon. Oh, Painticus likes Slendrina but doesn't like Fear and Hunger? Yes, fuck you.